By the way, this is my translation, Japanese translation of Professor Guido Calvary, Yale Law School professor. He's world famous. He's my mentor. And before coming to Brazil, I met with him 3 years after my last visit there. And he's a pioneer of law and economics. And I don't know if there's already a Portuguese translation, but this is very, very nice and very sincere. And I brought this here to dedicate. This is Ninomiya. The title is The Future of Law and Economics. Law. He's becoming 90 years old. How many of you compared with my last class? Oh, you're new. Yeah, I just like me type kind of mean. And yeah, this is okay. I very much appreciate his kindness. I admire him. He's my great senior. And you might be looking at Japanese, some of you might know.
Bom, então, desculpa atraso, mas vamos começar a falar hoje. E, então, ele vai focar hoje mais nessa questão de direitos humanos. Tem uma minoria, está falando da nossa situação, que chama Direito. E, bom, do ponto de vista do DNA, não são éticos, são mais estão fazendo até 1868, viviam assim, diria que totalmente calmo, mas já havia uma certa perseguição mesmo na época federal. E com então começou a ver a imigração interna. Então, eles tinham uma cultura própria, né? Não tinham escrita, mas tinham uma cultura própria, música, vestuário, tinha assim artesanato assim de talhas de madeira, mas enfim, eles foram aos poucos sendo perseguidos, né? Eles não sabiam como fazer o comércio, né? Eles viviam de caça e pesca, as peles dos animais que eles coletavam eram comprados, entre aspas, né? Com desvantagem, né? E recentemente, quer dizer, houve diversas legislações para protegê-los, entre aspas, né? Como no Brasil, né? Mas, então, foram aos poucos sendo aculturados, né? Esse que é o problema. E porque a política do governo japonês, né, até a Segunda Guerra Mundial, era de aculturar, né, os povos para os quais iam dominando, né? Mesma coisa fizeram com a Coreia, né? Impuseram aí a língua japonesa, impuseram os nomes japoneses. Então, quiseram fazer isso com os ainos também. E agora, mais recentemente, então, os ainos já então, se despertaram, né, para a sua identidade e estão querendo preservar a sua língua, as suas músicas, etc. E tal. É sobre isso que o professor vai falar hoje. Já, se não sei.
Okay. So, if you don't mind, why don't you write your name and email address and why you are here or your interests or whatever. Yeah, please pass around. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming early in the morning. And my name is Kunihiko Yoshida from Hokkaido University. And I'm a civil law professor. And today, I'm going to talk about Ainu people, the indigenous people in Japan, and they congregates in Hokkaido, where I'm from. Hokkaido is a northernmost island in Japan. I show you a map later. There are about officially 20,000 people in Hokkaido and 50,000 people in Japan, but many of them are hidden, and there could be 10 times of Ainu people, actually more. And in my last class, 先生、こっちの方がスライドが見える。どうぞ。Yeah, in my last class, I talked about reparations and reconciliation with regard to many concrete cases, starting from the Japanese Brazilian atomic bomb victims cases. And today's topic, Ainu people, is also related, actually, reparations and reconciliation, because there's serious past injustice to them in the past, even though many Japanese don't know much about that. That's a problematic. And okay, let's start. As I have already started, let's do some review of my last class for those who come here for the first time. There's a lot of technical terms and for example, reparations. The reparations mean the broad, inclusive term of redress and remedies for the past injustice. For example, in the United States, one of the most famous cases is about the Japanese-American internment cases. That's the leading case of reparations in the United States. And I understand when you go to the Japanese-Brazilian immigration museum, there's a similar problems here in Brazil with regard to Japanese-Brazilian people in those days. And lawyers and legal scholars tend to think about monetary compensation is the only remedies for past injustice, but that's false. According to the recent research, reparations are much broader. First, sincere apologies should be made first. Second, historical education about past injustice. Third, its memorial and museum describing human rights infringement should also be included. So in that sense, the Japanese Brazilian Immigration Museum, where we visited last weekend, is one of the most important place for learning reparations in this country, I think. And on the other hand, reconciliation means the process of getting the antagonistic relationship back to normal by changing vicious circle of hatred. And the third one is, can you change this? It's, no. It's hidden, you know. Look at this, yeah. You can see, you can read in your laptop, but the third one is repatriation. Repatriation is getting back the ancestral remains in this situation. That's one of the current most serious, imminent issues for the Ainu issues, for Ainu people nowadays. Okay, next, please. And my self-introduction. As I said, I'm in civil law, especially housing. I'm interested in everything. You know, civil law, as you already know, it covers everything related to ordinary citizens' life. Housing welfare law, disaster law, environmental law, focusing on Fukushima typical case, and reparations in the East Asian context by learning a lot from lots of debates in the American legal scholarship as the important field of tort law. I'm curious whether you have already learned reparations as part of your tort law class. In Japan, unlike me, most of the civil law scholars have not taught reparations. And in the American law, the indigenous peoples matter is one of the biggest issues in the subject of property, as you may gather. And for example, the Chinese Korean slave labors, as I discussed in my last class, Comfort Women case, or Nanjing massacre, Chongqing bombing, biowar, by using virus developed at Unit 731 in northern China. And Khmer Rouge genocide or Jeju mass killing. As I tell you, today, after the end of World War II, from the late 1940s for several years in Jeju, the southernmost island of South Korea, more than 30,000 people, Jeju Islanders, were massacred in the peacetime after the end of World War II. I tell you afterwards in the details. And reparations with regard to Ainu people that I discussed today, which is the indigenous people in Hokkaido, is also a good example of reparations. However, a reparations approach suggested by the UNDRIP. UNDRIP means somebody knows UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People. That's made in 2007, has been actually, even though Japanese government signed UNDRIP, the basic approach adopted by UNDRIP, that is reparations approach, has been still denied by the Japanese government, oddly enough. Okay, next please. And my theoretical background is I studied in the United States 5 times for long-term as long-term research. First, Northwestern, working on contract issues. And then when I moved to Stanford Law School in the mid-1990s, my concern has moved to property. And then in early 2000s, I had a chance to study at Harvard Yenching Institute. And of course, Harvard Law School is close to Harvard Yenching. So I made friends with a lot of Harvard Law faculty there. And then I studied at University of Miami Law School. What kind of image do you have about Miami Vice? But Miami Law School is one of the center of critical legal studies. And there are a lot of race issues. And then lastly, I studied at the University of Colorado Law School. That is the center right now, the center of indigenous people's law. And of course, as you may gather, I'm interested, but my basic methodological approach is about my concerns are with critical theories of different kind as ramification of the American legal realist movement in the 1920s and 30s. Oddly enough, in the Japanese civil law scholarship, American legal realism is very influential among my mentors or their mentors. And this is very exceptional in East Asia. Japan only, the influence of American legal realism is very strong. But neighboring countries, the dogmatism, traditional study of doctrines, legal doctrines, are very strong, contrasted to the situation in Japan. And I myself, oh, what happened? What? Oh, okay. Thank you. And so I've been influenced, as Professor Ninomiya knows, the influence by Japanese version of legal realism. And our mentor, the mentor of both of us is Professor Hoshino. He is a leader of the Japanese version of realism, legal realism movement. So right now in the United States, there are a lot of ramifications such as Law and Society, spearheaded by the University of Wisconsin law faculty, or relational contract theory advocated by my first mentor in Northwestern, Ian McNeil. And feminist legal studies or critical legal studies, critical race theory, or LGBT law, and so on. And after experience a lot of stimulating studies, I tried to use those American methods to the East Asian context after kind of making a detour. Okay, go ahead. Oh, this is a picture with Duncan Kennedy. Duncan Kennedy is at the Harvard Law School faculty, and he is a leader of the critical legal studies, as many of you know. And one more very important person from Brazil, Roberto Unger. Roberto Unger is a Brazilian, but he's a faculty of Harvard Law School. And I've read many of his books, and it's difficult, but very influential if you read it carefully. Okay, go ahead. And this is the theoretical framework that I discussed a lot in my last class. the process of getting real reconciliation. Here's the 4-step approach. First, fact findings and the recognition of the past injustice in details by perpetrators. This is the first step. And second, based on the first step, admission, recognition of past injustice and its historical responsibility by perpetrator side. And third, thus, we can make sincere apology and supplementary monetary compensations. And fourth, at the end, in some of the cases, forgiveness might be made voluntarily from the victims. This is 4-step approach. And notice that the latter stage is presupposed by the former stage. This is very important. Okay, go ahead. So, if you follow this theoretical framework, you can understand what is wrong in the process taken by the Japanese government. The Japanese government has notoriously poorly handled reparations regarding many historical injustice cases compared to Germany. For example, Chinese and Korean slave labor cases, comfort women cases. It seems to me, Japanese government or government officials do not understand this process of reconciliation. The Ainu reparations can be included in many unresolved historical injustice reparations cases. Due to the denial of the UNDRIP reparations approach that I showed you already, the Ainu people also face hate speech. Many criticism of their privilege. Many conservative people accuse them when they get some privilege by saying reverse discrimination. Have you heard this term, reverse discrimination? So they unjustifiably they're getting much benefits because they themselves don't know our past injustice. They should get them as a redress, as part of the corrective justice, the tort law principle. Okay, go ahead. And for example, through this theoretical framework, you can easily understand how badly and poorly Japan has been proceeding for real reconciliation. For example, in the comfort women case, former Prime Minister Abe and other cabinet members denied the facts of coerciveness in the Japanese Diet in 2006, and even the existence of notorious institution itself, in spite of numerous testimonies by comfort women themselves. Against this backdrop, you can imagine how empty Abe's expression of apology to George Bush in those days sounded to the victims. Furthermore, in other cases, such as the Chongqing bombings cases, Japanese government officials have been trying to avoid factual issues by attacking the legal principles, because it seems they don't understand the factual issue is one of the most important stage, but it seems they're indifferent to the past injustice, because they are mainly focusing on legal principle to deny their responsibility. That's the behavior style. Okay, so okay, next please. And you can reasonably understand why the leader of the Hanaoka litigation, Mr. Gensen, whom I met at his home in the late 2000s, he was upset and shocked, fell ill in bed. After knowing the defender's attitude to deny its responsibility. even though it agreed to pay 0.5 billion yen settlement money in 2000. He said, this is not the matter of money, but the matter of sincerity of apology. Let's think about what makes the apology sincere. This is the basic question. And fourth, why many Korean comfort women rejected the proposal made by the Asian Women Fund agreement in 2000 and by the 2015 Japan-Korea Comfort Women Agreement with 1 billion yen provision, when a sincere apology with the admission of legal responsibility was lacking. Go ahead. And from Japanese side, this is a picture taken when Foreign Minister Kono was scolding a Korean ambassador in Tokyo after hearing the Korean Supreme Court decision about the Korean slave labor cases. It seems he doesn't understand the separation of power, and he's never made an apology about this, about past injustice, but he's just mad at the result of the Korean Supreme Court cases. Go ahead. And as I showed you in my last class, I had a chance to talk at the Korean Supreme Court several months before the revolutionary 2012 reparation case judgment there. So there are so many Korean Supreme Court law clerk in front of me. I was there. Okay, go ahead. And this is a picture of the Comfort Women Agreement that was made at the end of 2015. Okay, go ahead. And this is the picture with Mike Honda, who is the Congress people who made a proposal for the Comfort Women accusation decision in 2007. He's retired from the US Congress, by the way. I met with him shortly before his retirement. Go ahead. And okay, let's talk completely different issues. We are now moving to the annual issues from various perspectives. By the way, we are overwhelmed by the serious disaster due to climate change, such as flood, hot summer, frequent typhoon, continuous heavy rain, and so on. On the other hand, we also face the radiation disaster in Japan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Fukushima. How can we get energy differently by renewable? Even though officially it seems slow change about getting new energy. So in this lecture, I'm going to think about the important message that could be gained from the indigenous knowledge or from the indigenous perspective, and how can we do that? Okay, go ahead. And I show you several pictures when I visited the disaster site. This is one of them in Kyushu, westernmost island in Japan. Southern part, Kumamoto was hit by heavy rain and then flood. 14 people have been killed in the nursing home there. by this serious flood. Okay, go ahead. I went there. And on the other hand, here in Brazil, you're also hit by floods early this year in February 2022. I can get this news even in Japan. Floods in São Paulo, Belo Horizonte, Petropolis, near Rio de Janeiro. And this is the related pictures. Okay, go ahead. So worldwide disaster across the globe. Oh, what's happened? And I talk about the next stage, some of the Brazilian indigenous people sad story, okay? And last February, I visited Manaus for the first time. And there I met some of the experts at IMPA. IMPA is the Amazon, the research institute of various kinds. And many people there have been killed due to COVID-19. Right now, the 660,000 Brazilians were killed, whereas 30,000 Japanese were killed. And in the United States, 1 million people killed due to COVID. And we have to think about how come there's so many in the United States and in Brazil. And especially the situation of the indigenous people was worse. They were killed due to their poor access to healthcare, low vaccination rate, weak immunity system, and so on. Especially the report of Mr. Aldeban Baniwa. His picture was shown at the beginning because he died so early due to COVID. He died at the age of 41. And go ahead. He is at the below on your left-hand side. His picture was there, and he is actually husbands of the woman whom I met last February, and both of them are working for IMPA. And here, the picture was taken at Miss Ishikawa's office. She's an expert of mushroom, and she's got a doctor degree of botany at Hokkaido University a decade ago, and she's right now one of the most influential scholar in that field and also at IMPA. And on your left-hand side, the Anna Carla Bruno is his wife, and that's her picture, her family's picture. Go ahead. And the second, second sad story. At Musa, that's IMPA's botanical garden. There's a pirarucu. Pirarucu is the biggest fish in Amazon, and you can see when you take a boat there, so many pirarucu you can see. And this is pirarucu's scale. And but serious problem of mercury contamination there, and that's why I'm here. Before to Sao Paulo, I was at Amazon, Amapá State, for several days. And the person next to me on your right-hand side, he's Desio Yokota, and his father is a close friends of Professor Ninomiya. He has a lot of network in many ways, and so coincidentally, he showed me when he heard about my visit to Amazon. He introduced Desio to me, but it's turned out he's the really specialist of this issue, the mercury exposure issues for indigenous people, as a matter of fact. And in Desio's article, he has asked us to eat, or he has asked indigenous people living along Amazon to eat not carnivorous fish, but eat herbivorous fish by changing their eating habits. But as a matter of fact, it's tough when we visited their site. Many of them are poor, and they can't afford to change eating habits. For some of them, carnivorous fish that is accessible easily is indispensable. So they have to eat poisonous fish. This is the issue. Okay, go ahead. And I went there this time, May, this month. And this is the picture of meeting with Alecia Leal, who at the Porte Grande, the city near near the river, and she's affected by the mercury problems, and she's forgetful. She's 48 years old. She's too young to be senile. So that's not the case. This is due to mercury. And she has problems with her eye, vision, and she has difficulties I prepared about 200 slides for today's lecture. So, okay. And so thus she has suffered from Yamata disease, I think. Next, please. Some questions? Okay. Next, please. The river's name, Arguali. Yeah, have you heard the name? The kind of a tributary of Amazon River. And there's a big gold mine along that river Arguali, and the Lorenzo, one of them is Lorenzo gold mine, and the other is Villanova. how many people, how many students have been attending online? So anyway, okay, go ahead. Oh. Okay, okay, go ahead. Next, please. Yeah, I took a boat from Porte Grande and took the boat for an hour and a half one way, and the river's water is very exceptional for me compared to the usual tourist spots, boat rides. I could not see a single bird. I could not see single fish in the river. And it's a dark red river. And because, as I already explained, there are two big gold mines, and also the hydroelectric dam has been constructed, and it's bad for river water, according to the specialist of the river fish, Rio Araguari. How many of you know that river? It's oh, you don't know? This is one of the worst tributary of the Amazon River. And I noticed by chance that dredge ship there. It's bad, actually bad for. And there are so many of the gold mine have been run by the artisanal small scale gold miners, and each of them use this kind of small ship getting gold, and they use mercury, and you know, I already used the term Minamata. Minamata is the city name located in Kyushu, the westernmost island in Japan. And I've been there so many times. The Minamata disease patients have been officially recognized in the mid-1950s. And the disease is very serious. And you can see the situation by many movies, related movies. And some of them are protected by free medical treatment or by getting some money allowances. But this is not the problem of money, and but it's very hard to get their healthy bodies or healthy mind, even after several decades. And according to the related attorney, the only 1/10 of real Minamata disease patients, even in Japan, have been protected. 9/10 have not been admitted as the official Minamata disease patient. This is the situation. But in Brazil, according to Decio Yokota, there's no protection at all for them. And so even them just warn and ask the indigenous people along the river to change eating habits. That's the most, according to Decio, they can do. And if you try to go to mining sites, you've been killed, you've been shot. This is the situation. So Mr. Yokota, Decio Yokota, is running a non-profit for this problem, but he himself has never been to Villanova. This is the situation. Okay, go ahead. And this is the map. Cecilia showed me the situation of the Rio Araguaia in Amapá State. Amapá State is the northern Brazil, located at the river near close to ocean. And this is Macapa. Yeah, the Rio Grande is here. Porto Grande is here. I drove there by 1.5 hours drive from Macapa, the capital city of Amapá State, and then took a boat, as I told you. And I just went to there. But the Araguaia River running, and there's a Lorenzo gold mine, and here the Villanova gold mine around there. And the contaminated water flows to Araguaia River. This is the situation. So go ahead. And third topic, it's a kind of indigenous people sad or hopeful stories. Miss Ishikawa, the expert of mushroom in Brazil, one of the most famous mushroom experts here in Brazil, showed me this. The Purus is the name of the black thread. Black thread. She's holding black thread made by mushroom in Brazil. And the indigenous people, the Yanomami people, has discovered to make basket from Perusa. And it's we can say it's the indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge. Have you heard the name of the traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge? This is very important here in this country. But the problem is, it is not well protected by the intellectual property, as you may gather. And next one, please. The alleged Leal herself is the leader of the new non-profits that to make a soap from copaiba tree. The oil, precious oil, can be obtained from the precious oil can be obtained from copaiba tree, the thick trunk, and the precious oil can be obtained, and then the soap or ointment can be produced according to her or her colleagues' indigenous knowledge. Very nice soap and ointment. And so she tries to organize, she tries to produce this precious soap by organizing. You can Asociación das Sementes do Araguaia. Okay, and she might in the future face similar problems. So in case of, I visited South Africa a couple of times, and my friends show me around the CSIR. That's the research institute which tried to protect this kind of indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge for so many indigenous people living there in South Africa. Okay, go ahead. So as I already told you, there's a problems of indigenous knowledge in terms of intellectual property. Indigenous knowledge was considered traditionally collective property, and it does not match with individualistic intellectual property. And thus, indigenous people's knowledge might be exploited by patents of related big companies entering market afterwards with similar products. So that's why CSR is all about. Okay, and next one. And then different topic. Professor Ko Chang-hoon, who is the Professor Emeritus of Jeju University in Korea, and I, both of us are kind of long-term collaborators to build a Peace Island network for restorative justice from the indigenous perspective by connecting Jeju, Hokkaido, the Ryukyu Islands, Hawaii, and others. And we have established the educational network by holding summer school every year. We have taught the Jeju 4.3 tragedy and reparations reconciliation process afterwards. As for the 4.3 Jeju massacre, mass killing, their reconciliation process was just started after the turn of the century. And peace education, 3, environmental education, 4, dark tourism, 5th, leadership education, and so on. And from the indigenous perspective. Okay, next one, please. And this is map. Fine. Hokkaido is there, the circle, and located north in Japan. Okay, Korea, China, Mongolia, Myanmar, Thailand. Okay, go ahead. And Jeju is there, the Korea and the southern island, and close to Tsushima, Kyushu. And when the Jeju massacre occurred, so many Jeju islanders moved to Osaka. And still 1/4 of ethnic Korean in Osaka area are from Jeju, still nowadays. Okay, go ahead. And this is the Jeju 4.3 Memorial Museum. Okay, go ahead. And this is the picture taken at the Jeju Memorial Hall. And Professor Ko is at the center, and I was beside him. And Professor Eric Yamamoto, he's very famous on the reparation field, and he's a Fred Korematsu professor of University of Hawaii Law School. And all three is a kind of core members of this association. Okay, go ahead. And this is there at the Peace Park. There's so many tombs, huge tombs of the Jeju massacre victims. There. Go ahead. So let's think about. This is also odd. And what do we have as a common feature in those islands connected to each other, one another? And yeah, the Hokkaido. Have you been? How many people have been to Japan? The Hokkaido is, or Jeju is one of the best tourist spots nowadays. So there's so many tourists in Hokkaido, in Jeju. But on the other hand, there's a dark story. In Hokkaido, as I said in my last class, the a half of the Chinese slave laborers used to work there. There are 58 out of 135 Chinese slave labor sites are located in Hokkaido. And also to 150,000 Korean forced labor worked in Hokkaido at the end of World War II. That's a huge. There's so many coal mines or so many airports, secret airports for the Army and Navy. And we have indigenous people, all of them, in Hokkaido, in Ryukyu Islands, Hawaii, and actually the Jeju Islanders are also indigenous people, I think. And all of them are oppressed by majority, oppressed by the assimilation power. And sometimes, as I just mentioned, indigenous people themselves even don't recognize this fact despite their oppression, marginalization, subordination. And according to famous anthropologist of Tokyo University, Dr. Naruya Saito, with their DNA analysis, the Ainu people is the most genuine indigenous, pre-modern people. In that sense, the Ainu people very precious for anthropologists. While the Ryukyu people and the Jeju people are more mixed with Chinese agriculture people. Okay, next please. So Jeju was called Tamra, and it used to be an independent nation until 15th century, like the Ryukyu kingdom or the Hawaii kingdom. And even after, as I mentioned, the end of World War II, Jeju people, a racial minority, were oppressed by the right-wing group people and massacred before establishing a President Lee government in South Korea. Jeju also has a unique legend of 3 ground holes, quite similar to the Tucano people. We heard Tucano people, one of the Indio, the indigenous people in Brazil. Go ahead. And this is a picture of my campus. The Hokkaido University has the most beautiful campus in Japan, for sure. But very beautiful. And one of the tourist spots close to the Sapporo station. But on the other hand, very few people know that the campus used to be Ainu village, actually, Ainu village. And the university, Hokkaido University, was established after the conquest of Ainu people there. Okay, and in our university, there's a negative legacy of colonialism. And Hokkaido University has played negative roles in the process of reparation or repatriation, actually, sad to say. Go ahead. And the same thing can be said about the Ryukyu people. For example, regarding, there's a similar repatriation programs of Ryukyu people's ancestral remains. And many of them are kept by Kyoto University, and there's a lawsuit going on between them. And Professor Shinoda, the president of anthropology, sent Kyoto University president I know him. The Professor Yamagiwa is a very famous expert of gorilla, the monkey, and his research is very famous and very understandable, and I've been influenced by him, by the way. And Shinoda-san, former president of Kyoto University, that describing that Ainu and other indigenous peoples' ancestral remains are public property, and that they should be made available for anthropological research. And actually, almost all the Ainu ancestral remains were stolen by the anthropologists in those days. So if you visited Ainu tombs, there's nothing. And I myself was very shocked to realize this fact. And there's a strong assimilation policy with regard to Ryukyu people. The assimilation policy started from the colonization of Ryukyu Kingdom by the Meiji government in 1872, named the transferable Ryukyu Islands in Japan. And not many Japanese know that the United Nations, especially its Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, that's CERD, it's called CERD, has requested that the Japanese government should admit the Ryukyu people as a separate indigenous people since October 2008. And the third, CERD, issued its final decision and statement about the indigeneity of Ryukyu people to Japan in September 2014, but the Japanese government denied that. Okay, go ahead. And this is a Ryukyu woman named Miss Itokazu, when she made an address at the United Nations in 2014. She used to be a Japanese diet person until 2019. Okay, go ahead. So, but I'm very interested in these issues. What is common feature of indigenous world, or what's feature of indigenous peoples as opposed to modern civilized people? And there's a kind of, I think, there's a lot to learn from this perspective, kind of indigenous knowledge perspective. First, they are very attentive to coexistence with ecological nature. And second, their property notion is totally different from our modern property notion, written by Japanese Civil Code 206. That's a very individual, despotic notion of property, exclusive, individualistic property notion. But for them, their main notion is collective property thinking, such as common property or sense of sharing, as opposed to individual modern property, including intellectual property. And third, they are very interested in, very attentive, very concerned about peace building by gatherers and hunters. And anthropologically, agricultural people studied accumulation of individual wealth, which has brought about war. Fourth, most of them are racial minority, and they are subordinated by majority people in each country. Okay, go ahead. And fifth, they have and endangered species in peaceful islands. This can be set up, for example, by the Ryukyu people. And with regard to natural environment, they have kind of a different notion of stewardship or trust notion about nature. In the Christian world, human being is the center of the natural environment. Human being conquered everything, conquer natural environment. So that's why you can understand what's going on in the Amazon. The human beings cut all the trees, rainforests, for their farm, and by illegal logging, they can produce and export woods to make money. This is a human beings centered worldview, what is called anthropocentrism. And traditional indigenous knowledge has been understood so far negatively. You know, as I already mentioned, it does not have matched well with modern intellectual property, individual property. But right now, I'm trying to learn from their perspective positively. Okay, go ahead. And this stewardship notion of property has been advocated by my good friend Kristen Carpenter. She's a Cherokee, and she's right now, after graduating from Harvard, she's a leading scholar of indigenous American Indian law or some other compared to indigenous people's law across the globe. And she used to be a chair of MRIP. That's the 7 specialists under the special rapporteur of UNDRIP. And she's my good friend. Since I stayed there in Boulder, Colorado, she's a Colorado Law School professor, Council Tree professor there, and director of the American Indian program there. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, this is, sorry, previous picture I show you. Hirose-san, previous slide again, sorry. And this is a picture taken at the MRIP convention that was held in March 2020 at UBC, Vancouver, Canada. And the Christian is right of me. And there's another on your right-hand side, Angela Riles. She's also indigenous professor at the UCLA, Los Angeles. So 2 of them are kind of young indigenous leaders in the American Legal Scholarship in this field. Okay, let's go ahead. And Jim Anaya was dean of Colorado Law School when I was there. He's also indigenous people. And after graduating from Harvard, he taught at Iowa, Arizona, and became a dean of University of Colorado Law School. And we have to notice that he was the first special rapporteur of the UNDRIP, the United Nations, you know, UNDRIP is the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People in 2007. So he was the special rapporteur from 2008 through 2014. And he's a trailblazing expert of indigenous people's law and international human rights law. and he's fluent in Spanish. And he's visited so many countries, indigenous, and met with so many indigenous peoples across the globe, and contributed a lot to the protection of indigenous people in OAS. OAS is the Organization of American States. So Northern and Southern American states. Okay, go ahead. So animism is one of the features of the world. So living world and dead world, world of death, they are dead people. And Mr. Nigel, oh, I forgot to add his photo, but Nigel Crowhall is one of the very important expert at the headquarters of UNESCO right now. He's my good friends. And in recent years, I had a meeting with him about these issues. And Nigel, when he visited Jeju, he was very much impressed with the shamanistic tradition there. It's indigenous, I think, he said. And interestingly, that Jeju shamanistic ritual site has been succeeded by the ethnic Koreans in Osaka. I had a chance to attend the ritual site in Japan. And the similar animism has been found in the Ainu people and many other indigenous peoples across the globe. So according to the animists, the dead spirit is locally kind of omnipresent, close to the village, and by this ritual site, they can communicate with dead people, the spirit, by shamanistic people. So, by the way, the original indigenous religion is animistic polytheism, as opposed to Christianity or even Buddhism that pursue monotheism. Legends of Japanese Shintoism, Jeju, Samson Hyo, which is similar legend in Brazil, seem to have been influenced by monotheists, already have been influenced by the monotheist religious world, I think. Go ahead. And in Manaus, at his indigenous restaurant, I met with Tucano people named Gianpaolo, working on Tucano legend, similar to Jeju legend at his restaurant. And he's, after getting his doctoral thesis, doctor degrees, he's running indigenous restaurant. Have you eaten any local fish in Amazon? I tried tambaki there. It's very delicious. And piraruku, have you eaten piraruku? Okay, go ahead. And this is the picture exhibited in the Egyptian Museum in Turin, the Torino in Italy. It's written by hieroglyph, but the Jewish scholar named Dr. Lipsius in 1841 deciphered these documents. And he himself has been very impressed with the kind of animistic world expounded by the Egyptian kings. So they have lots of power. You know, they ask many people to build pyramids, but with regard to natural environment, very humble. That is opposed to the the anthropocentrism, the Christianity world overwhelmed by the anthropocentrism. And this is it. And okay, go ahead. Yeah, so they have the similar worldview. When they passed on, they've been judged by the natural gods, whether he should go to hell or heaven by reviewing what they did when they are alive in real worlds. So they have to be very simple, and every natural beings, birds or fish or some other animals, all of them are fish. All of them are gods for Egyptian king. This is very interesting, isn't it? And by deciphering that hieroglyph book, the Book of Dead, we can understand their indigenous world. I visited Turin for my first time to attend the International Legal Scholars Conference, but I've been much more impressed with this book rather than the topic in the international conference, by the way. And let's say kind of intermediary conclusion about the Peace Islands Network. Our decade-long experience corresponds with the UNESCO IUCN peace-building philosophy of the UNESCO Constitution. And indigenous people's philosophy is helpful to criticize our individualistic capitalism and to rebuild our communal, inclusive vision of the 21st centuries. Thus pay high regard to natural environment. Go ahead. And we established the Peace Islands Network education based on Jeju Island after the turn of the century from the following perspective. First, reparations and reconciliation from the historical injustice. You know, when you see the tragedies in Ukraine, every day we can notice a lot of vicious hatreds, vicious cycle of hatreds. And I've been there to see I made friends with a lot of people in Kiev right now, the pronunciation, to see the aftermath of the Chernobyl explosion there. I'm working on disaster issue as well. So I've been there, and I invited a lot of doctors from the hospitals in Kyiv. And so I'm always wondering how they can survive in these tragedies. And so with this vicious cycles of hatred, I'm just in my last class, a person asked me what Yoshida's research about reconciliation or research about reconciliation, reparations does mean with regard to Ukraine tragedies. That's very deep question, and always overwhelmed by those tragedies. I always think my effort is still limited, but we have to continue this effort of building Peace Islands Network. And first, so reparations and reconciliation perspective. And the second, indigenous peoples, we have to concern about indigenous peoples' oppressed situation. And third, environmental, we have to attentive to environmental global justice. And all of which is closely related to the mission of UNESCO. Go ahead. And here we had the UNESCO's related convention. And interestingly, the World Heritage Convention project attracted so many people across the globe. And so the inscription as the World Cultural Heritage, World Natural Heritage, very, very influential, as you notice. And they also have the Memory of the World program and Intangible Cultural Heritage program, or some cultural diversity programs. Okay, go ahead. So now we have, you might be tired, but I'm going to give you the essential matter of the Ainu tragic history. And it consists of the current Ainu issues and second, historical analysis of the Ainu tragic history. Go ahead. And there are, as their current imminent issues, we have two things. In the current cultural agenda, according to the Japanese government, I think their project is not from a reparation perspective. And in this sense, the project is always irrelevant to the Andre. Please reconsider my theoretical framework. The most important is the education of the past injustice. But in the current Ainu policies, the Japanese government tries to hide past injustice. And they are not interested in educating what we have done for them. It's very different from the world standard. And so from that perspective, and they just try to limit their scope to non-political cultural matters. And that's why the upopoi, the symbolic part of Ainu people, for the Ainu people, has become open. But without knowing what happened to Ainu people, it's basic fallacy for as the Ainu education for the youngsters, I think. So the construction of the Ainu symbolic space in 2020, but it's actually delayed to 2021 in Shiraoi, named Upopoi, for the Tokyo Olympic tourists, but it did not fare well, as you know. And we have the related 2019 statute. But its hidden purpose of Shiraoi Park is to avoid the historical responsibility reparations about thousands of stolen Ainu ancestor remains and burial arts. The Ainu ancestors, thousands of Ainu ancestor remains were kept until recently in Hokkaido University campus. There's a storage house. And after the opening of Shiraoi Park, it has been moved to Shiraoi. And mainstream of Hokkaido University professor tries to forget, sadly enough, tries to forget about our past injustice. So in this sense, it does not match with indigenous so religiously, I just told you they are animistic religious world. The ancestral remains should be kept locally, dispersely, close to the individual Ainu village. But it's been consolidated according to their view. They don't, such view does not match well with the Ainu animistic world, cultural tradition. So, and furthermore, the National Ainu Museum, newly built there, lacks human rights or reparations perspective. And the historical facts exhibited there is very limited and will be very different from museum in Washington, D.C. They have American Indian Museum, very attentive to the historical past. I've been there so many times. And right now, the African American Museum has become open under the era of Obama administration. And there's a detailed exhibits about the past injustice towards slaves who used to be carried from African continent. Here in Brazil, there's a similar story, in the late 19th century. Until then, there's many slaves here. That's the fact we youngsters have to learn. And as historical past injustice. Many people are interested in the jurisprudential issues. With regard to inheritance of historical responsibility, there's an argument, division of opinions between individualistic responsibility versus communal responsibility. And I discussed that issue in my previous slides. And for one, Immanuel Kant, Kantian perspective, there's individual. And Aristotelian perspective, they support the kind of communal responsibility. The historical responsibility should be succeeded according to them. But that's the case of the individual responsibility level. But the state responsibility, both of them support continuous historical responsibility. That's the situation. And the regional development by building Shiraoi Park is often mentioned as one of Ainu policy, but it's totally different matter for indigenous people. So in this sense, the reparations approach that is taken by UNDRIP has been rejected by the new statutes. And already such biased, perverse policy studied when the prominent scholars report was made in 2009. Okay, go ahead. And this is the picture of Shiraoi Park. And go ahead. So Hokkaido University campus itself was established, as I said, after the conquest of a Kotoni Ainu village there. The repository house for thousands of Ainu ancestral remains is a typical symbol of negative legacy of colonialism, even though most of them have moved to Shiraoi Park. There is still a collusive relationship between hired Hokkaido University professors, including prominent scholars for the report in 2009, and Hokkaido University Indigenous Research Center, and Japanese and Hokkaido government.
I mean the Japanese central and state provincial government, which still denies the right of self-determination. This is Article 3, the central clause of the UNDRIP, the right, every indigenous people have the right of self-determination, but it's been denied by the Japanese central and the local government and the related hired scholars of Hokkaido University. One of the audience asked me, when I visit the Hokkaido, I should go to the Hokkaido University Research Center, but it's situation, sad to say, sorry to say, that still very much different than the comparable research center in University of Colorado Law School, for example, or the American Indian legal program. And all of them are very supportive to the indigenous people from the grassroots level. But in Japan, still sad to say, the many related hired Hokkaido University professors support the government that turned their back on UNDRIP. So I think Japan, sad to say, is one of the worst developed countries with regard to indigenous law policy. And so the government still denies the right of self-determination and manipulates and oppress Ainu people, still nowadays. Go ahead. And for example, this is a kind of environmental or ritual debate. The Ainu leader in Monbetsu, the northern eastmost area of Hokkaido, he was arrested when he tried to catch salmon for Ainu traditional knowledge, the traditional ceremony, even though the UNDRIP states the indigenous people have the indigenous right to catch fish. That's their original occupation, the hunting, fishing, and gatherers. Okay, go ahead. And we held the International Indigenous Peoples Conference in collaboration with Sami people from Scandinavian countries. In my university, I'm there, and at the center there's Ainu women leaders, Miss Tahara, Miss Ukaji, whose son is the famous actor right now. But this is kind of exceptional grassroots movement. Go ahead. So let's get back to the Ainu issues from the reparation perspective. The reparation discussion with regard to Ainu people, the indigenous people in Japan, especially in Hokkaido, is far behind the goal of reconciliation. Despite Japan having supported the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that's UNDRIP, the Ainu Commission report that I have already indicated by a prominent scholars group in 2009 denied the reparations approach, and the Ainu policy situation thus has remained stagnant, except for the controversy on the construction of Ainu symbolic space in Shiraoi, that is to include monuments and the storage room for ancestral remains. Go ahead. And this is some of the pictures about the indigenous life of the Ainu people. Okay, go ahead. And here's a kind of a brief historical survey about Ainu land policy. The nomadic people, they are nomadic people in northern areas, especially in Hokkaido. And already mentioned the number of the population, but it's not true. Many of them are hidden due to the discrimination, marginalization, and still there are many Ainu people who don't want to identify themselves as Ainu people. And after the Meiji Restoration, their original occupation, that is fishing and hunting, was prohibited as pre-modern. The indigenous coastal land title was denied. And so before Meiji Restoration, the most of Ainu people live in the coastal areas, of course. But they are ousted. They are ousted. Their land title was denied. So in this sense, Ainu Moshi, that's the name of Hokkaido, formerly, was conquered by terra nullius doctrines. So according to this, why don't you check your dictionary, terra nullius doctrines. According to that principle, there's no people. The Ainu people were not considered human beings. So the mainlanders considered themselves the first human being. They are the trailblazer, you know, and they are moved forcibly to mountainous, barren, and hilly tracts of lands, which were allotted by the 1899 Hokkaido Formal Natives Statute. That's their main land law for the Ainu people. And the some tract, 5-hectare tract of land was given under the stringent condition that it should be cultivated within 15 years. And many of them were were not successful. And so they lost everything. They become homeless. And so, okay, go ahead. And the Hokkaido Former Natives Protection Act, in Japanese, Hokkaido Kyu Dojin Hogoho, in 1899. It's modeled on the United States General Allotment Act, that is called Dawes Act of 1887. The Japanese scholars are very sensitive to what's going on in foreign countries, and they studied a lot about the related statutes. Some kind of discriminatory statute with regard to Native people. And in the United States, it was abolished in the 1930s. But in Japan, it was used until the year of 1997 for a long time. It neglects totally the indigenous collective property right, as I just said. And small tract of barren, mountainous land was allotted under the strict condition that it should be cultivated within 15 years. But many of them are not used to agriculture. Their main occupation is fishing and hunting. And their staple food is salmon, for example. And they are not allowed to sell their land, or they cannot get mortgage. They set mortgage for finance. So in that sense, many Ainu people, all Ainu people, could not do business. This is a business class people, right? And so, so their land alienation or transfer or mortgage financing of allotted land was prohibited. There's no way to gain financial credit except through recourse to long-term lease contract. They lease their lands to somebody else and to get money. On the other hand, huge tract of lands, more than 1 million hectares, were given to mainlanders for allocation of undeveloped state property. That's a special statute in Hokkaido Act of 1897. This ludicrously unfair treatment could be illegal in terms of international human rights law, according to some of the cases by the Inter-American Human Commission or human courts that's located in Costa Rica. In certain Ainu neighborhoods, most prominently Chikabumi, that's close to Asahikawa. You might have not been there. The second largest city in Hokkaido. It's located in the center of Hokkaido. The Ainu people named Chikabumi Ainu used to live there, have lived there for a long time. The enforcement of the 1899 statute was postponed until the mid-1930s, and 4/5 of the allotted land were considered communal property and managed by the Hokkaido government. So the Ainu people individually at Asahikawa could only get 1/5 of the allotted land. By the way, the size of allotment is much smaller than that in the United States. And considered bad and considered communal property and were badly managed. Okay, go ahead. Oh, this is some of the pictures, and the picture taken many years ago when I was young. And I've been working on these issues for more than 2 decades. And this is the barren land close to the coast, actually cliff, close to the cliff in Kushiro area. And almost how many people could cultivate those hilly lands, barren lands, and such barren hilly lands were allotted. And you can understand most of Ainu people was unsuccessful and became homeless people and very suffering from poverty. And that's the main Ainu people situation. And this is the museum, Ainu museum in Asahikawa. I think it might be better to visit such kind of museum rather than the recent big national Ainu museum. Okay, go ahead. And this is a picture at the Tsuishikari tomb, Ainu tomb. Tsuishikari is located in the eastern suburbs of Sapporo, and Ainu people used to live in Sakhalin, named in Japanese Karafuto. But right now their situation kind of miserable. But series of war, certain time their land became Japan, and then by Rousseau Japan Treaty, it became Russia and then Japan, and then after World War II, the territory it became a Soviet Union territory. So many Ainu people there moved to Tsuishikari and suffer from the infectious disease there, and many of them killed died. And there are a lot of tombs, but when I first visited there, I'm very surprised to realize that all their Ainu remains are gone. Their tombs are empty. They are stolen. All of them are stolen by Hokkaido University professors. This is the situation for the purpose of anthropological study. Okay, go ahead. And historical analysis number 2. The Japanese and Hokkaido government, as I mentioned, and their hired scholars, including Hokkaido University Ainu Indigenous Research Center, still reject a reparations approach mandated by the UNDRIP in 2007. For example, their communal property neglected by taking a nominalism approach. As I indicated, in case of Chikabumi Ainu in Asahikawa, 4/5 of the allotted land were considered communal land, and it was managed very badly. And then after several decades, the return of the communal land is the current agenda. So in such case, the Hokkaido government took nominalism approach, rejecting re-evaluation of the land. And so in case of selling those, the Hokkaido governor in those days easily sold such communal land to somebody else, and they get some yen, 500 yen, for example. And by taking nominalism approach, the same amount of 500 yen has been returned to the related Ainu people. Is it okay? So many value changes. We should, I think, according to the civil law, legal doctrines, that should be evaluated, of course, but it's not the Japanese state government reject such normal approach. And the second, repatriation of more than 1,000 stolen ancestral remains denied. Unlike the practice of Nagpra in 1990, also the Article 12 of UNDRIP supported the repatriation of ancestral remains, but the Japanese government still denied by saying Hokkaido University still rejected the Article 12 approach by saying, their individual identity has not been discovered, has not been found, or saying like that. And the education of the past injustice still evaded by the government on purpose. The enlarged museum will be open, it's open already, but without any exhibits of their past injustice, unlike Holocaust Museum or African American museums in DC. The policies set up by Japanese government officials from top down across their heads. There's no, because the right of the self-determination has been denied factually, in spite of Article 3 of the UNDRIP. Okay, go ahead. So this is related pictures, the Nibutani Dam. There's a huge debates about construction of Nibutani Dam. There are sacred sites called Chinomishi has been submerged. It's the dam construction was made across the heads, and many of them disagreed with that project, but giving money and by hire, because of the poverty, some of them can get a job by working on construction of dam. And by getting some salaries, they're destroying the the sacred sites. And please remember the sacred, by the animistic world, the sacred thing is very important for them. Sacred mountain, sacred riverside. But those sites have been submerged by the construction of this dam. So at the bottom, that mountain is kind of a Chinomishiri, the sacred mountain. But due to the following, the dam construction of dam named Biratori Dam, those mountains have been submerged or destroyed. This is a situation, and actually, and okay, go ahead. So Nibutani area is the poor neighborhood of Hidaka in the southern Hokkaido, where Ainu people congregate most. Nibutani Dam decision of the Sapporo District Court in 1997 is now world famous because Judge Ichinomiya considered the construction of the Nibutani Dam that submerged the Ainu sacred religious places illegal. He considered the construction of dam illegal by citing Article 27 of ICCPR, that's the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as its ground. So international human rights norms are rarely mentioned in Japanese court cases, but this is kind of an exceptional, successful case. But in spite of his brave decision, Judge Ichinomiya also had to give up, destroy the dam. But in the United States, I've heard a lot about some of the cases. Case judgment tries to destroy the dam. That is very bad for the natural ecosystem from the environmental perspective. So as I mentioned at the beginning, in Rio Araguari, right now the hydroelectric dam is now being constructed. And that's very bad for the ecosystem and also worsen the mercury contamination problems. And please think about that. You know, there are so many similar issues, even in this country. There are so many issues going on that is affected to indigenous people in Brazil. However, many Ainu people are hired by day laborers for its construction. As I said, in that sense, they support its construction. It's a kind of catch-22 situation. Okay? Go ahead. Oh, this is the first congressperson named Kayano, Shigeru Kayano, and the leader of Ainu people in that area. He's one of the prominent plaintiffs of the Nibutani Dam decision. And I often, you know, made a field work, as you might imagine, to this area with my seminar students, and he's been helpful for us for a long time. But he passed on. He died in 2006. Go ahead. And by the way, the Ainu people has their own language. Their language is totally different. And it's been succeeded orally. They don't have written character. So many of Ainu leaders are very good at speaking in front of the audience without looking at anything. And their memory is great. And so due to that traditional indigenous habits. So there are many reparation cases regarding indigenous people outside of Japan, all over. But as for Ainu, by using my theoretical framework, the commission report in 2009 mentioned before, it denied historical responsibility generally and rejected reparations approach. I doubt they really took Japanese past injustice towards Ainu people seriously. I doubt it. And I doubt that they really understand the historical responsibility in its true sense. So as a result, their new project of Shiranoi Upopoi seems to me very superficial, just looking for tourism. Because many of them, I've heard from Professor Ninomiya, there's a meeting between the Hokkaido governor and the cabinet leader. But both of them do not know much about the past injustices. So in that case, their project itself is kind of shallow, it seems to me, even though I don't know much about their talk. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so related picture, I think I should stop around here, and then please, Hirose-san, why don't you just show them some pictures. This is Nelson Mandela's prison when I visited Robben Island. The apartheid reparation is one of the two biggest starting point for reparations research. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Now, this is the Kotoni-Sakshu River. When you visited our campus, the river is called Kotoni-Sakshu River. Kotoni is, remember that Kotoni is the name of Ainu family who used to live there. Okay, go ahead. And there's no words about the conquest of Ainu lands. This sign, go ahead. And this is a kind of international repatriation of the Ainu people. There's a bone in the box, and it was stolen by the German travelers named Schlesinger. And from the Ainu tomb in our campus, and it was kept by the German Anthropological Association for 138 years. And just recently, it was returned to the government officials. Across the head of the related people, I know Kotoni related, Kotoni family related Ainu person, but she doesn't know anything about this after she was told by me about the recent event. Okay, go ahead. Okay, and it's a former president of that association, anthropological association, who made sincere apology to me about this event. Okay, go ahead. And this is the Ainu ritual in front of the repository house in our campus, where thousands of ancestor remains were kept for many years until recently. And this is a person, Kotoni family's person, in front of the Chikabumi grave, but it was empty beneath this Kotoni grave because it was also stolen by the anthropologist. So, okay, this is the notorious Hokkaido University professor, the Kodama Sakuzaimon, and he showed emperor around, there's Showa emperor around his office, and it's surrounded by Ainu people's bone, ancestral remains, and burial arts. Okay, go ahead. And this is now all the stolen burial arts were kept as Kodama selection as one of the museum in Hakodate, the third biggest city in Hokkaido. And this is one of them, iron ornaments that are stolen by him and kept there. It's, there are a lot of looted art all over across the world. But when you visited the museum in New York, always there's an exhibit and there's a writing about provenance, where this exhibits can be obtained and how, but there's no such description. Go ahead. Okay, and yeah, a lot to tell, but she's already died, but she's one of the plaintiff leader for repatriation, and she first tried to negotiate to repatriate her ancestral remains, but Hokkaido University rejected in February 2012, and she decided to file a lawsuit about that. Okay. And this is a ritual finally by the settlement between Hokkaido University and local Ainu people. And this is a picture of the repatriation in Urakawa city. No, go ahead. Okay. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, I discussed in the matter of repatriation, and I tried to compare the legal reparations with moral reparations. And I think we're running out of time. And why don't you, to show me some other, previous one. There's a chart. The legal reparations is partial and accidental, and there are many hurdles. The hurdles of evidence, or the statute of limitations, or state immunity doctrines, or things like that. But moral reparations, on the other hand, kind of a holistic, foundational. And but on the other hand, legal reparations might be official, and the legal reparation might be coercive. But on the other hand, moral reparations is foundational, and it should be done by voluntarily. And notice that the Holocaust reparation has been done at this level, at the level of moral reparations. And the legal battle, it did not fare well. And legal reparation sometimes has been done without sincerity, as a matter of money. But on the other hand, moral reparation should be done with sincerely, with remorse. Okay, so such a difference, and I think in the field of reparations, as opposed to a lot of talk cases that you learn in traffic accidents or medical malpractice or some other product liability or things like that. There's a very unique feature in the field of more reparations, I think. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. There's many American scholars working on reparations, interdisciplinary scholar, and this is also some other scholars who's a good friend of mine at the Tulane Law School in New Orleans, Robert Webster. Okay, go ahead. And okay, almost end. Okay, thank you. And next one. So provisional ending remarks. The Ainu situation, one of the worst among developed nations, sad to say. The Ainu indigenous policies do not match with the world standard of UNDRIP, the reparations approach. The Japanese government tries to hide its past injustice and to restrict its policy scope to non-political culture matters. But culture issues is closely related actually to legal and political matters, as the article cited in the Nibutani Dam decision. So repatriation of ancestral remains is the most imminent issues for the Ainu people still nowadays, whereas the environmental justice is the most serious issues for the indigenous peoples across the globe. Okay, this might be the end of my today's lecture, and I'm happy to get your reaction or some. Okay, so it's the end. Any questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Yoshida. And well, we don't have much time, but if the student have some question to Professor Yoshida, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor, at first. And I have some commentaries, maybe some questions. But at first, I would like to ask for everybody pay attention in something. In this room, it was the first time that I came for this room. I already knew it, this building of law school, but it was the first time that I came here from this room. So the first thing that I pay attention, it was in this art, yeah. This guy is Dom Pedro I, or how can I say this in English? Pedro I, Emperor, yeah, of Brazil. And indigenous people here in Brazil have been killed since 16th century, yeah. And it's a characteristic of genocide of original people. And this is a symbol of a colonized country as Brazil, you know. And if you take a walk in all this center of this city, you can see colonized symbols like that, like this emperor first, Pedro I emperor, yeah. Well, as Ainu descendant, as I mentioned in the last Friday, I expelled. It's a strong word to describe the immigration of my family, but now after your lecture, I am pretty sure that it was a great expelled, you know, of Ainu people from Izoki, Ainu Moshiri, yeah. And I know also that most part of Ainu descendants here in Brazil, they don't know that they are Ainu descendants, you know, because Japanese Empire, when they colonized it, yeah, Ezoki in Kingdom or Ryukyu Kingdom, yeah, it was a genocide also, maybe. And it was a great expelled because they knew it, that in Brazil and in another colonized countries, they was abolished the slavery system and the white supremacy in my country. They replace the slavery workers, the forced workers, for East Asian workers, yeah, like my grandmother and my grandfather. And here in Brazil, indigenous descendants, they are considering as Japanese descendants. Here we was assimilated also with Japanese people in general, yeah. So we have, if I can use another strong word, I considering myself as a child of a diaspora, yeah, of Ainu people. In another hand, you know, I have 5 brothers. Yeah, I have 7 siblings, and 5 of them are 5 brothers. 3 of them already worked as a dekasegi in Japan. You know, my grandmother, when they go to Japan to work, kind of forced work, if I dare this kind of thing, my grandmother said to them, I hurt my hands with collecting coffee in agriculture, and now my grandchildren will hurt their hands in automotive factories. So, well, I don't know how to finish these ideas. As Ainu Brazilian, yeah. Well,
you can be a great bridge maker. You know, you yourself in the future, you can do a lot because you are so young,
yeah,
and you can contribute yourself to the support of Ainu people, or or you can contribute to the friendship between 2 countries in terms of Ainu people. You know, protection.
Yeah, it's one of the things that more I wish that Ainu people in Brazil know that they are Ainu, as like me. And actually, I'm doing the 2nd year of PhD in philosophy on a philosophy department. So I came here because when I read about Hokkaido University and a lecture about repairs, you know, I came here because that at maybe the main reason that I came. So another commentary that I wish to do to finish, it's that we have kind of manifestations, that word exists in English, I think so, of shamanism, Ainu shamanism here in Brazil, and Ushinanshu shamanism also. When I say that, it's just because in Umbanda religion and Candomblé religion, it's Afro religions, yeah, that have heritage of resistance of Black people in this country. It's another diaspora, the huge diaspora that we have here in Brazil. It's Black people, yeah. And one of my uncles, declared himself, he already passed on, but he became a shaman and declared himself as a shaman in a candomblé religion. And one of the subjects of my research on PhD on philosophy, it's in candomblé or Umbanda religion. So we have some manifestations of Ainu religion and Ushinanshu religion here in Brazil in this kind of syncretism, yeah, with Afro religions. So I appreciated your lecture, Professor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, let's keep in touch. Yeah, thank you for your reaction. Some other questions? Yeah, please feel free, and you know, with a lot of pictures in my slides, you get relaxed. And this kind of the Ainu lecture, the lecture about Ainu people, is very limited. But in the United States, the history of Native Americans, one of the biggest field in the property class in the American law school. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was trying to understand exactly why is the Japanese government so reluctant when it comes to realizing proper reparations, because as you said, they, from what I understood from the lecture, they merely paid the reparations but haven't really realized any formal apologies to these people. And I don't think I've understood why isn't there a bigger movement towards educating Japanese people when it comes to these issues.
Thank you very much for your very interesting, and your question is very essential, I think. And you know, as for reparations, it's stagnant, you know, for the last several decades. As I discussed in my previous class, and very little government officials in Japan. It's easy to, you know, to understand the reconciliation or reparations process. And all of you, I think, in this hall, in this class, can understand easily the process to attain genuine reconciliation. But for government officials, they may, very few, it seems, understand the meaning of reparations. Because this is, I discussed in the latter part of the last slide, jurisprudential, a lot of justification in terms of corrective justice perspective, and even from the utility perspective. After my previous class, one commercial law professor came to me and mentioned CSR, corporate social responsibility. And for example, the prominent, you know, there's the settlement by Mitsubishi with regard to Chinese forced labor, and to gain popularity for them, it's beneficial for them to get Chinese market, you know, to get their highest by doing reparations. But for the last decade, generally speaking, in response to your questions, there's no reason, but without any justifiable reasons, the situation has been petrified. And for example, the Professor Masao Maruyama, one of the famous political scientists in Japan, he himself many years ago mentioned reparations, but especially the emperor's responsibility has become taboo, and that's the beginning. And but in my case, learning a lot about reparations discussions, from reparation arguments, I've learned a lot, and I realized that we are still far behind the goal in this field. It's very funny. It's very mysterious for me, actually. So the young people's mind might be very important to start this work. And even in your countries, I don't know, are you Japanese American, Japanese Brazilian or not? But there are a lot of passenger cases. You know, as I indicated, there's a Japanese, Brazilian discrimination cases during war, and it's unfinished business, for example. And the Brazilian indigenous cases are ubiquitous, omnipresent in this country. And they play a very important role for the preservation of the precious natural environment. And they can live, the indigenous hunters and gatherers across the globe has lived in this planet for thousands of years without any environmental problems. So they're in that sense, their indigenous knowledge to survive this environmental crisis era might be much more taken close up, I think. And so if you have a chance to go to Amazon, there's so many people suffering from these issues. And so actually, I have to go back to Japan, but I'm a supporter of Brazil, and so the friendly relationship between two countries, Brazil and Japan, spearheaded by Professor Ninomiya, should be succeeded in many ways. He's the precious and my great superior. And I think many of your young students follow him, and in collaboration with Japanese scholars like me. And I'd like to come back here to support the Minamata disease patients living along the Rio Alaguari, or some others. The Yanomami people also suffered a lot seriously by the mercury contamination. And there's some other Indio that suffered mercury a lot. Okay. Sorry, I can't answer your question, but your question is very important. And I've been thinking about how come, but there's no reason. And you know, as I discussed in my previous group, for example, my father, you know, got involved in war as soldiers in so many neighboring. He fought in Manchuria, the Chinese continent, Taiwan, Philippines, and he was reticent about his such experience. And but he himself, you know, thought about his war experience a lot by himself. So, and some of his colleagues were vocal. But the problem is young generation situations. So with the lack of education, historical education in Japan, the young people in Japan did know nothing about past event. That's systemically very problematic, and the starting point of our problem. And so, as I said in my previous question, every young people have their conscience. In case they know, they realize the past injustice, they become collaborative. They become attentive to the reparations, reconciliations. And when I see the bombings in Ukraine, and I studied a lot about the Chongqing bombings or Lushan bombings, and I visited there to meet with a lot of several tens of people still living there, and they cried a lot in front of me about the past event and 60 or 70 years ago. And I know a lot, and when I received the news about the bombings in Ukraine, we did the same thing in the past, and but this we reflect enough about the past tragedy? No, that's the problem. And we have to educate. Even though my effort is limited, this is part of my limited efforts. And I pretty much appreciate your coming here. And let's do it together to improve the situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Yoshida. Well, I have been giving some classes in this faculty about the international protection of human rights. And in the chair, Fujita-Ninomiya chair, which was founded 3 years ago, we have been giving some approach to this problem of Ainu, or black women, and some discrimination against Okinawa people in Japan. But actually, I confess, the class given by Professor Yoshida was very extensive one, very deep approach to the Ainu matter. And I want to thank you very much to Professor Yoshida, because I had a lot to learn from this class and class of Friday about international protection of international human rights, including our Indian matter and the problem of contamination of mercury, Minamata matter in the Amazon. We actually know very few. We have some, yes, conscious about that, but Amazon is so far. São Paulo, I think maybe 3,000, 4,000 kilometers. And in our daily work, daily living, the problem of contamination, problem of the rainforest, actually we should have more conscience about what is happening here in Brazil, especially in this government of Mr. Jair Bolsonaro. Well, I'd like to thank you again. And I wanted to give him this small souvenir of our faculty. これね、訳装されてないんですけどね。